Now that Donald Trump is the president, how is the gun industry responding? Well, there has been a difference in the number of sales for the gun industry, and the difference is pretty stark. So according to reports, shares of gunmaker Sturm, Ruger and Company, or RGR, were down as much as 9% after reporting results Wednesday afternoon that missed expectations. In the second quarter, sales for the company were down 22% against the same period last year, while profits fell a total of 53%. So when Democrats are in office, it's actually really great business for gun manufacturers because there is this fear of gun regulation, gun control. Even though that regulation never really happens, people freak out, and since they're worried about it, they'll go out and they'll buy guns and they'll stockpile. Now, there has been decreased overall consumer demand in 2017 due to stronger than normal demand during most of 2016, likely bolstered by the political campaigns for the November 2016 elections. And that's based on a statement by a gun manufacturer. So they're very well aware that Republicans are not necessarily good for business.
Let me just pause there for a second. So it's not only because they're not as afraid under Trump that their guns are going to get taken away, but also during the election, that's when they were doing all the propaganda. If Hillary wins, she's going to take your guns away, and people panicked and stockpiled. Right. Which then means, by the way, they also have less money to buy more guns now, and they already bought a lot of their guns. So that's another reason why sales are going down.
So what I was curious about, because keep in mind the NRA endorses politicians, they endorse Donald Trump, and the NRA is also very closely tied to these gun manufacturers. Gun manufacturers fund the NRA, which is why it's such a powerful lobbying group. So I was curious to see what they do to make up for sluggish sales, right? And this quote kind of gives you a sense of, what their mentality is and what their marketing strategy is. Now they say, this is based on the CEO of RGR. He says, "You've got more new shooters coming along. All that stuff drives demand. And in some municipalities, you have the cops backing off. They're being seen by the media too often as the enemy. And so they're backing off, and crime rates in those cities are soaring through the roof. Those people could care less who's president. They want to defend themselves." And so, it's this cycle of paranoia, right? More paranoia leads to more people buying guns. More guns lead to more violence, leads to more cops feeling paranoid, and it's justified. If you know that there's a bunch of people out there who are armed, you're gonna feel paranoid. It's a vicious cycle, and it's just so fascinating to see it work.
And it's fascinating for him to admit it, because he's talking about his business. He's only talking about it in a financial concept, but if you break it down into human terms, it's incredibly gross. He's saying basically, look, the cops are afraid, this is part of the phenomenon, the cops are afraid that you've got a gun, because everybody's got a gun, so they're more likely to shoot. That makes people say, hey, back off from to the cops, and he then claims in a conservative kind of way that now crime is running rampant because of that. There's actually no proof of that. And that makes everybody else nervous, and that's a bad thing for us, but he's like, that's a good news for us because it drives demand, as long as everybody's afraid. But the first part of the sentence is even more important. When he said you've got new shooters coming along, all that stuff drives demand. So what we see to be a vicious cycle, new shooters, then people get worried and they grab their guns or buy new guns, and then there's more shootings because of that, which then makes people more paranoid. If you're a gun maker, that's not a vicious cycle, that's a virtuous cycle. That leads to more and more profits.
Right.
We die, they make more money. And that's the CEO basically admitting that, saying for their business, that's good news. And that right now, they're having a little bit of a problem though. They're like, shooters are on their way. Every day there's gonna be a new mass shooting. Last year there was almost literally one mass shooting where 4 people are shot every single day, okay, on average. Now, on the other hand, they're like, when the Democrats are in office, it's great. We can pretend that they're gonna take your guns away. It's never happened, they've never proposed it, but it doesn't matter. We have people who are scared out of their minds. That's our business model, and it allows us to scare them better.
To be fair, Democrats kind of propose gun legislation, right?
No,
but they do so
never to take your guns away.
Oh yeah, that's true.
No, it's the mildest legislation. By the way, legislation that an overwhelming majority of gun owners agree with.
Right.
Saying, hey, you gotta close the loopholes so that we at least know who bought the gun, so that if you kill somebody, we know who killed them or have a better chance at figuring it out. So the gun, or I think it's like 73% of NRA members agree with the legislation that was proposed by the Democrats during Obama. But NRA gets most of their funding from
gun manufacturers.
So they're like, no, we want you to be paranoid. We don't want you to figure out the crime. Crime leads to more paranoia, which leads to more gun sales to defend yourselves. They don't actually have a problem with crime.
Look, what I'm curious about is, you just mentioned how even the majority of NRA members are in favor of closing the loopholes to ensure that the bad guys don't get access to guns. What I'm curious about though is how come every time there is any type of debate or discussion about gun regulation, it immediately devolves into two insanely polarized groups that refuse to see the perspectives of one another. So I'm not in favor of banning guns, right? I think that I have a pretty common sense approach when it comes to gun legislation. I'm in favor of the background checks. I'm in favor of closing things like gun show loopholes, where you go to a gun show and you can buy guns from the back of someone's truck. But at the same time, I'm also very well aware of how the NRA is funded, how the NRA is corrupted by gun manufacturers, how it all really has to do with profit. And so for people who are hardcore gun advocates, are you at least able to acknowledge that, right?
I think that 27% is, it's not like they disagree a little bit. They're super fervent and they've been riled up into this fear and paranoia for the profit of others. And they think, no, they're gonna take it. I don't care anything. They say slippery slope. If you propose legislation where you know who bought the gun and that they're not mentally deranged or a felon, well, that will lead to, and if you have a terrorist watch list and we don't let terrorists buy guns, next thing you know, we won't let citizens buy guns. Now, of course, they never heard that slippery slope slides both ways. So then you can make more and more extreme examples. Well, if we let people on the terrorist watch list buy guns, which by the way, they say, no, did you know that 3% of the people on that list are not necessarily terrorists? Do the math on that. Okay, so now you can have other problems with that watch list, but that's pretty extreme already. You've already at the end of a slope. But then you can say, then what, should we let people on the terrorist watch list buy bazookas, RPGs, landmines, tanks, nukes? The slippery slope slides both ways, but they don't hear that. They hear, oh no, they're coming to get me. And the reason they think that is because there was a sophisticated propaganda campaign done to drive gun sales. They did it on purpose to maximize profit, which is logical. But you should know why they did it so that you know what's real and not real.
Right.
But I do enjoy the irony of the NRA and all those guys supporting Republicans and finding out, oops, when Republicans are in office, we don't sell as many guns. Looks like they shot themselves in the foot. TYT membership gets you commercial-free Young Turks. Download it, stream it, podcast it, get all the network shows, and support independent media. TYTnetwork.com/join.